Hey guys, here we go with another Caro-Kann middle game to end game planning video. The last video I recorded was also a Caro-Kann. I played two 15-10s the other day. Both Caro-Kanns on lead chess. Both of them led to kind of similar end games. I'm going to show you guys the planning I used to play this Caro endgame. So here we go with the Caro-Kann advanced variation. 3c5. This is what we recommend in the ChessGoals Caro-Kann video course. I'll put a little bonus content link above if you want to check out that playlist for more info on the course. And what happens here is we kind of get this French defense, except we lost one move by playing the c-pawn up twice, but we have the freedom to move this bishop out. So we can utilize that to our advantage, trade off the bad bishop. So that bishop technically is bad because these pawns will all be on light squares. Now we can trade off that bad bishop. So here my opponent plays h3, and I immediately take. I would much rather have the knight in this closed position than the bad bishop. And after queen takes, queen b6, this was an inaccuracy, or actually a mistake according to Lee Chess. Bishop b4 check was better, but I want to focus on the middle game and endgame planning coming up. So at this point, knight takes d4. I looked at it and I was a little bit afraid to play it, but that was an improvement over what I did in the game. Rook c8. Okay, so at this point, the position is equal according to the engine, but let's start to look at the imbalances. So the material is even. White does have the bishop pair, but the center is locked up. So with the center locked up, if I can keep that center closed, the knights can hopefully become stronger than the bishops, especially this dark square bishop on e3, which is blocked in by white's own pawns. In terms of the pawn structure, one nice thing with a lot of these Caro-Kann structures is all of these pawns are pretty solid. Whereas if you look at the white structure right now, b2 and d4 are potential weaknesses, especially the pawn on d4. So I can use that to my advantage. And I do have a small advantage with the rooks because my rook is already on the open file. White's rooks are not yet in the game. So here my opponent plays queen b5. This move surprised me, but I don't think it's a bad move. They're trying to trade off queens and relieve some of the pressure on these pawns. So here I traded queens, play a6. So what I'd like to do is go for a queenside expansion, maybe jump my knight to b4 and start to infiltrate the white position. My opponent didn't want any of that. They traded off bishop for knight. So now there's no bishop pair advantage, but start to notice the transition here. Even though I'm really far behind in getting this king side developed, I have the active rook on c6, controlling the c file, and my plan is to move the king, get this bishop out with check, move the knight, and bring the other rook over. So that's the plan, pretty straightforward. Let's see what the opponent does. Knight c3, I immediately go for the pin, so I jump on this, because if I can create a scenario with this knight that has a lot of freedom in the position to jump around the locked up pawns against this bishop, which is locked in by these pawns on dark squares, that's a very low risk position that I should never lose. There are chances that maybe white can just hold a fortress and draw, but really it's a 2-result game, either a win or a draw for us. So bishop b4, I'm happy to trade off that c3 knight. Rook c1, knight e7, castle. Here I played king d7. Maybe I should have just taken the knight right away, in hindsight. Because if I were playing the white pieces here, I would probably try to get that knight out of there. Don't allow that trade. But my opponent helps me out a little. a3. Yeah, Lee Chess is even saying knight to e2 was best, so I should have taken the knight last move. But now I take. Bishop takes c3. Rook takes c3. And here I decided to trade rooks and put my rook on c8. Well, the reason I went for this position is because we have this good knight against bad bishop scenario. My king is very active, so he's ready to come over here. And the focus is going to be on the queenside pawns. So white's getting into this situation where the dark square bishop is very bad, and my rook will be active, white's rook will probably be passive, and my king is coming in quickly. So this is already probably close to losing for white with an eval of 1.2. Here my opponent plays rook c1. This is probably their final mistake in the game. I think at this point, I felt very confident that I could win going forward. What white should probably do here is play rook to b1. Get a little bit more active with the rook, even if it sacrifices a pawn. Because you'll see what happens. There's no play for white in a couple moves. Rook c4, blockading the pawn. Knight to c8. My plan now is to reroute this knight to b5, double attacking these pawns. And I counted this out. White probably wants to have their king here, their rook on a1, their bishop coming back to b2. At that point, they can create this sort of fortress and try to hold everything. I counted this out, though, and it's just a little bit too slow for white. So we have bishop to d2, knight a7, rook b1, knight to b5. And at this point, we can already see we have the double attack. White's bishop is tied down to 1, but it's being attacked twice. And here my opponent finds a very creative move, rook b4. I didn't really expect this. I thought rook b3 would be played. But the nice thing about this position is I'm okay with the rook trade. Because this knight is so much stronger than the bishop, what I want to do is make sure my king still has access to get into the position, to come in and attack these white pawns. So here I play king to c6. I'm okay with white taking my rook, and now because the king guards b7, I am threatening to take either pawn. Actually, I might not be able to take this pawn because of rook check, but I'm threatening to take the a pawn currently. So my opponent plays rook takes c4, I take with the d pawn, and now we can see my knight is sitting really nicely here attacking both of these pawns. There's no way for white to guard both. And prior to playing king c6, I'd calculated this, that if a4 is played, I can actually move the knight and go over and grab that pawn with my king. So the knight will come park on d5, hitting this, and my king will go around and win the a pawn. So I had that calculated out right here when I played king c6, just to make sure that I'm not getting into one of those fortress scenarios. So my opponent retreats the bishop, knight d5 hitting this pawn, and now king b6, and I king walk over to this pawn. Now at this point I knew the position was completely winning. I wasn't too concerned about winning as quickly as possible, but what I wanted to do is just keep full control of the board. Don't allow my opponent even an ounce of counterplay. So after king c2, the first thing I wanted to calculate was, can I be greedy and grab another pawn? I calculated that this works. After g3, I win the h pawn, so now I'm up 2 pawns. And here the biggest risk is to make sure that white doesn't have some sort of sacrifice by pushing the f pawn, pushing the d pawn at the same time, and somehow these 3 against 2 create a queen before my king can get back. So that's the biggest source of counterplay. But here I play g6, blockading this. So if this pawn pushes, I take this pawn, I take this pawn, I take this pawn, I take this pawn. So right now none of the white pawns can move. All the counterplay is under control. Bishop c1 and knight goes back. Bishop e3, knight g4. And here I calculated that I can march this king back to c6, play b5 before the white king can get to a5. So that's my plan. You can see my opponent goes for this route, but I have king b6 in time to play a5 next. And here what I'm doing is centralizing the king. Again, all the counterplay is controlled. Park the knight on d5, hitting this pawn, and now I'm ready to play b4 next. And at this point my opponent resigned, because if you look at the position, they're really just completely running out of moves. This pawn is about to be captured. I'll be up 3 pawns, connected passers. The king is also ready to eye this pawn. The eval is -11 for black. So this is Caro-Kann middle game to endgame planning video. Please like and subscribe. Our goal is 1,000 subs by the end of the year on YouTube. So we really appreciate if you subscribe. Maybe show a friend this video. And we have links in the description below. If you want to join ChessGoals, if you want to see about our Caro-Kann course, check out those links. I appreciate you guys watching. Leave a comment, let me know. Do you like these kind of videos? Do you play the Caro-Kann? Do you want to see more middle game, endgame planning? That's kind of our focus for July. I'd love to hear your feedback. I reply to every comment that I receive. So thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.